When my ex-husband took everything, he thought he'd left me with nothing. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that my father had left me with everything that mattered. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, like the world has been pulled out from under you, and you're in free fall, I want you to stick with me through this. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you feel it, because we're about to talk about what it means to rebuild from the ashes. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and quiet defeat. It was a sterile beige room, designed to absorb emotion rather than reflect it. The carpet was a muted gray, the chairs were a stiff, unforgiving leather, and the art on the walls depicted stormy seascapes, which felt a little too on the nose. Mr. Davies, my court-appointed legal aid, slid the final stack of papers across the polished mahogany desk. His movements were precise, economical, like a man who had performed this sad ritual 1,000 times. He didn't look at me. He looked at the papers, at the signature lines, at the clock on the wall. Anywhere but at the woman whose life had just been neatly liquidated and transferred to someone else. That's the last of it, Alara, he said, his voice as neutral as the room. The house, the joint accounts, the vehicle. It's all been settled per the decree, settled. Such a calm, clean word for such a violent tearing apart. Mark's lawyers had been sharks in tailored suits, and I had been the swimmer who'd wandered too far from shore. They'd used my decision to leave my career to support his, my signature on documents I hadn't understood, my emotional exhaustion against me. They painted me as unstable, grasping, a freeloader, and in the end the system had agreed. He got the life we built. I got my clothes and a restraining order he'd filed for leverage. I stared at the final document, my signature a shaky, unfamiliar scrawl at the bottom. It felt like an epitaph. I had nothing. Not just no money or no home, but nothing of myself left. 2 years of marriage had hollowed me out, and the 6 months of the divorce had scraped the hollow clean. I was 26 years old, and my net worth was a suitcase of clothes in the trunk of a borrowed car and a debt to the state for my legal counsel, Mr. Davies cleared his throat, a small, dry sound that brought me back to the beige room. There is, he began, hesitating for the first time, one other item. It wasn't part of the marital assets, so his counsel had no claim. It was never even on their radar. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a large manila envelope, yellowed and soft with age. It looked ancient compared to the crisp, white documents of my ruin. My name was written on the front in a faded, spidery script I recognized instantly. My father's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. He'd been gone for 5 years, a sudden heart attack that had felt like the world tilting off its axis. This was filed with my office by your father's estate lawyer when he passed, Mr. Davies explained, his tone softening slightly. The instructions were specific. It was to be held in trust and given to you only under one of 2 conditions, your 30th birthday, or the legal dissolution of your marriage. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It was heavy, thicker than I expected. Inside was a folded, brittle document, a deed, and a single tarnished brass key attached to a faded red ribbon. I unfolded the paper. It was a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of a small plot of land and a structure in a place I barely remembered, Blackwood Creek, a forgotten corner of the state 300 miles north. The property was listed as Lot 42, Ridgeback Road, transferred to Alara Vance, my maiden name, on my 18th birthday, signed by my father, Thomas Vance. He had never told me, in all the years before he died. He had never once mentioned it. He bought it when you were a little girl, Mr. Davies supplied, seeing the confusion on my face. A foreclosure, I believe, paid cash. Taxes have been paid automatically from a small annuity he set up for that purpose. It's not much. The tax assessment values the land at next to nothing. The structure is listed as uninhabitable, uninhabitable. The word echoed the way I felt. Still, it was something. A piece of paper with my name on it that didn't also have marks. A key that opened a door somewhere that wasn't his. Thank you, I whispered, the words feeling foreign and rough in my throat. I hadn't had much to be thankful for lately. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The meeting was over. My old life was over. I stood up, the stiff leather of the chair groaning in protest. I clutched the envelope to my chest like a life raft. It was all I had. That first night, I slept in the borrowed sedan at a rest stop 50 miles out of the city. I couldn't bear to be in the same zip code as the life that had been stolen from me. I leaned the seat back as far as it would go and stared up at the fuzzy sodium orange glow of the highway lights. Every car that roared past on the interstate felt like a judgment. They were all going somewhere. They had homes, destinations, lives. I was adrift. I closed my eyes and saw the clean, minimalist lines of the house Mark and I had shared. His house now. I saw the garden I had planted, The kitchen where I had tried so hard to create a sense of warmth. The bedroom that had become a cold and silent battlefield. He had told me I was nothing without him, that I was too sensitive, too impractical, too broken to survive on my own. For months I had believed him. Curled up in the cramped front seat of a car that wasn't mine, with everything I owned in the trunk, it was hard not to believe him still. I clutched the old key in my pocket. It was a real solid thing. Not a key card, not a code, but a piece of metal with weight and teeth. It felt like a promise or a puzzle. Why had my father done this? We'd had a complicated relationship in his last few years. He'd been distant, quiet, and disapproving of Mark in a way he never fully articulated. He'd just watch him with these cool, assessing eyes, a silence that was louder than any argument. I had thought he was being judgmental, that he didn't want me to be happy now, I wondered. The instruction to give me this upon my divorce felt like a message from the past. It felt like he had known. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold night air seeping through the car's seals. The next morning, I bought a gas station coffee and a map, not a digital one, but a sprawling, crinkling paper map of the state. I found Blackwood Creek, a tiny speck in a vast sea of green that denoted a national forest. There was one road in and one road out. It wasn't a destination. It was a place you got lost in. With the last of my cash, I filled the gas tank. I had a full tank of gas, a key, and a deed to an uninhabitable structure. It wasn't a plan, but it was a direction, and for the first time in a long time, it was a direction I was choosing for myself. The drive north was a slow, deliberate shedding of my old skin. With every mile, the concrete and steel of the city gave way to rolling hills, then dense forests. The highways narrowed into two-lane country roads, the chain stores and fast food restaurants replaced by boarded-up general stores and hand-painted signs for local produce. The air changed, losing its smoggy metallic edge and taking on the clean, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. I drove with the windows down, letting the wind whip through my hair, feeling like it was scouring the last 2 years from my soul. I was chasing a ghost, a memory. I remembered visiting the cabin once, maybe twice, as a very young child. My memories were fractured, sensory snapshots. The rough bark of a pine tree against my cheek, the shocking cold of a stream on my ankles, the taste of a marshmallow burnt black over a campfire. My father was there, a younger, happier version of the man I remembered from his later years. He was smiling. In my memory, he was always smiling there. After he died, I'd packed his life into boxes, photos, papers, clothes. I'd stored them in a unit that Mark had eventually deemed an unnecessary expense. We'd decluttered them, his word for throwing away my history. Now, this cabin was the only piece of my father I had left. The thought was a sharp pang of grief, a familiar ache in my chest. The final stretch of the journey was a gravel road that seemed to climb forever. The car bounced and rattled, kicking up a plume of dust behind me. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches forming a dense canopy that plunged the road into a perpetual twilight. There were no other houses, no signs of life, just the endless silent woods. My phone had lost its signal an hour ago. A flicker of fear, primal and cold, ran through me. I was completely, utterly alone. What was I doing, driving into the middle of nowhere, chasing a half-remembered dream on the word of a dead man? Mark's voice was in my head again. "See, you're impulsive. You can't take care of yourself." I pulled over, the engine ticking in the sudden silence. The woods weren't silent at all. They were alive with the hum of insects, the chattering of a distant squirrel, the sigh of the wind in the treetops. I got out of the car and took a deep breath. The air was cool and clean. I was scared, but underneath the fear was something else, something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet hum of anticipation. I was on the edge of something unknown. It was terrifying, and it was mine. I got back in the car and kept driving. Ridgeback Road was less a road and more a suggestion, 2 tire tracks disappearing into the woods. A faded wooden sign, half swallowed by moss, confirmed I was in the right place. I followed the track for another quarter mile until it opened into a small, overgrown clearing, and there it was. The word uninhabitable had been generous. The cabin was small, made of dark, weathered logs, with a sharply pitched roof that was sagging in the middle like a tired old man's shoulders. The porch listed to one side, its railing rotted through in several places. Windows were shattered, dark eyes staring out into the clearing. Weeds and saplings grew right up to the foundation, threatening to swallow the whole structure back into the forest. Wasn't a house, it was a ruin, a monument to neglect. For a long moment I just sat in the car, the engine idling, and stared at it. This was my inheritance, my great escape. A pile of rotting wood in the middle of nowhere. A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was a perfect metaphor for my life. Broken, abandoned and probably full of spiders. I turned off the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. It felt like the end of the world. Or maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a new one. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of pine needles and decay. I walked slowly toward the cabin, my boots crunching on the gravel and twigs. The front steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one carefully before putting my full trust in it. The porch was covered in a thick blanket of leaves and pine cones. The front door was swollen in its frame, the green paint peeling away to show the gray, splintered wood beneath. The brass doorknob was tarnished almost black. With a trembling hand, I took out the key. It felt impossibly small and fragile against the heavy, stubborn-looking door. I slid it into the lock. It resisted, grating with rust and disuse. For a horrible second I thought it wouldn't turn, that this was the final cosmic joke. I would come all this way only to be locked out. I put my other hand over my first, took a steadying breath, and turned with all my strength. There was a loud, painful screech of metal on metal, and then a solid, satisfying clunk. The lock had opened. The door was another matter. I pushed, but it wouldn't budge. It was swollen shut. I put my shoulder into it, pushing again and again, grunting with the effort. My frustration mounted, turning into a hot, helpless anger. Anger at Mark, at the lawyers, at my father for leaving me this puzzle box of a legacy. With a final, desperate shove, the door flew open, scraping a deep gouge into the wooden floorboards and sending me stumbling into the darkness within. The air inside was cold and musty, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and sleeping things. A single shaft of light cut through the grime on a window, illuminating a blizzard of dancing dust motes. The cabin was one large room. To the left was a small stone fireplace filled with old ashes. To the right was a kitchenette, with a rusty hand pump for a faucet and a wood-burning stove. In the back was a simple bed frame, stripped of any mattress, and a small, rickety-looking table with one chair. Everything was covered in a thick gray blanket of dust and draped in cobwebs. It was a tomb. I walked slowly through the space, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It was even worse than it looked from the outside. The floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. There was a dark, spreading stain on the ceiling where the sagging roof had leaked. In one corner, a mouse had made a nest out of shredded newspaper. This wasn't a project, it was a teardown. What had I been thinking? There was no way I could live here. I didn't have the money, the skills, or the strength to fix this place. The brief flicker of hope I'd felt on the drive up sputtered and died, leaving me in the cold, dusty dark. I sank onto the lone chair, which wobbled precariously, and dropped my head into my hands. The tears I had been holding back for days finally came, hot and silent. I cried for my failed marriage, for the life I'd lost, for the person I used to be. I cried for my father, for the widening gulf that had grown between us before he died. And I cried for the utter, overwhelming hopelessness of my situation. I was alone, in a derelict cabin miles from anywhere with nothing and no one. Mark was right. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. The shaft of sunlight had moved across the room, and now it was falling on the stone hearth of the fireplace. And I saw something. A single stone in the hearth was a different color, a darker gray than the others, and it seemed to be set just slightly out of alignment. It was barely noticeable, the kind of detail you'd only see if you were looking for it. I remembered something my dad used to say, a little joke between us when I was a kid. Always look for the thing that doesn't belong, Alara. That's where the secrets are. It was probably nothing. A trick of the light. A shoddy masonry job. But it was something to do, a distraction from the crushing weight of my despair. I got up and walked over to the fireplace, my boots scuffing through the dust. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the stone. It was loose. My heart started to beat a little faster. I wiggled it and it shifted in its bed of crumbling mortar. I hooked my fingernails into the crack and pulled. The stone came free with a gritty scraping sound. Behind it was a dark square cavity, and inside that cavity was a metal box. It was an old ammunition box, army green, with a sturdy latch on the front. It was heavy. I pulled it out and set it on the dusty floor. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from despair. It was from a wild, improbable surge of adrenaline. This was intentional. My father had left this here for me to find. The latch was stiff but not locked. I lifted it, the metal groaning in protest, and opened the lid. The contents were wrapped in oilcloth. I carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside were several stacks of letters tied with twine, and underneath them, several thick, vacuum-sealed bundles. I picked one of the bundles up. It was heavy and dense. I saw the corner of a green bill. It was cash. My breath hitched. I tore a small hole in the plastic. Ben Franklin's face stared up at me. I fanned the bills, hundreds. I quickly opened the other packets. They were all the same. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills. I didn't count it. I couldn't. My mind was reeling. But it was a lot, more money than I had ever seen in my life. Life-changing money. But it was the letters that drew my attention. There were maybe a dozen of them, in different envelopes, all addressed to me in his familiar hand. One on top was separate from the others, with a single word written on the front. First, with trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. The date on the letter was from a week after my wedding. "My dearest Elara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means one of two things has happened. Either you have turned 30, happy and content, and this is just a little surprise from your old man, or, and this is the possibility that keeps me up at night, your marriage to Mark has ended, and you have come here because you have nowhere else to go. I pray it is the former, but I fear it is the latter." The words hit me like a physical blow. He knew. 5 years ago, he had known. "I have never trusted him," the letter continued. "I see the way he looks at you, not with love, but with a kind of ownership. I see the subtle ways he isolates you, the way he dismisses your opinions, the way he is slowly, carefully, making your world smaller until he is the only thing in it. I tried to warn you in my own clumsy way, but you were in love, and you saw my concern as disapproval. I couldn't push harder without losing you completely, and that was a risk I couldn't take. So, I did the only other thing I could think of. I prepared for the day he would break your heart and try to break your spirit. This cabin, this land, is yours. It has been yours since you were 18. It is legally invisible to him, an asset that never existed in your life together. The money in this box is for you to start over. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough for repairs, enough to live on while you figure out what comes next. It's the money I saved for my own retirement, the money I would have used to travel, to see the world. But I would rather see you free, my girl. There is no better use for it." I had to stop reading, my vision blurred by a fresh wave of tears. But these were different tears. They weren't for myself. They were for him, for the silent, heavy burden he had carried, his distance, his quiet disapproval. It hadn't been a rejection of me. It had been a desperate, silent act of protection. He had seen the storm coming and had quietly built me an ark, hoping I would never need it, but making damn sure it was there if I did. The rest of the letter was practical. Instructions on how to find the well, how to prime the pump, a warning about the temperamental wood stove. It ended with a sentence that undid me completely. "This place is ugly and broken, I know, but it's a good place. It has strong bones, just like you. Elara, you have strong bones. Don't you ever forget it. All my love, Dad." I folded the letter and held it to my chest, the paper absorbing my tears. The grief was still there, a vast hollow ache, but now it was mingled with a fierce burning gratitude. He had not abandoned me. He had seen me, truly seen me, even when I couldn't see myself. The dust-filled cabin no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a sanctuary. The crushing weight of hopelessness began to lift, replaced by a fragile, tentative seedling of resolve. I had money. I had a place to stay. And I had a final message from my father, a reminder of a strength I had forgotten I possessed. I stood up and looked around the dilapidated room. It was a mess. It was a ruin. But my father was right. The bones were good. A massive central beam of old-growth timber held up the sagging roof. The stone of the fireplace was solid and deep. The log walls were thick and chinked, built to withstand 100 winters. It wasn't uninhabitable. It was just waiting. Waiting for someone to come and see the potential underneath the dust and decay. Waiting for me. The next few days were a blur of hard, physical labor. I drove to the nearest town, a sleepy little place called Pine Ridge, about 30 minutes away. It had a hardware store, a grocery, a diner, and not much else. I felt the curious eyes of the locals on me as I bought tarps, a heavy-duty staple gun, work gloves, cleaning supplies, a new axe, and a bucket of roofing tar. I was an outsider, a city girl in hiking boots that were far too clean, but no one was unfriendly. The man at the hardware store, a grizzled old-timer named Gus, gave me a nod and a piece of advice. "Patch the roof before the next rain," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "And check your chimney flue for nests before you light a fire." It was a small kindness, but it felt enormous. Back at the cabin, I started with the roof. It was terrifying work. Climbed onto the sagging, spongy surface, my heart in my throat with every step. I found the main leaks, cleared away the years of pine needles and debris, and slathered the black, sticky tar over the holes. Then I stretched the heavy tarp over the worst section and stapled it down until my hands ached. It was an ugly, temporary fix, but it would keep the water out. Inside, I waged war on the dirt and grime. I swept away mountains of dust and cobwebs. I scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees. I pulled the mouse nest out of the corner and patched the hole with steel wool. I washed the windows, letting the clear northern light flood into the cabin for what felt like the first time in decades. Every task was a small victory. Every muscle that ached was a reminder that I was alive and capable. I was not the fragile, helpless woman from Mark's narrative. I was the daughter of a man who built things. I was a woman with strong bones. In the evenings, exhausted and sore, I would sit in the one good chair and read another of my father's letters. They weren't chronological. He seemed to have written them whenever a thought struck him. Some were filled with memories of my childhood, stories I had long forgotten. He wrote about teaching me to fish in the creek behind the cabin, about the time I got lost in the woods for a terrifying hour, about how he'd found me calmly making a house for a family of beetles under a fern. "You were never scared of the world, Alara," he wrote. "You were curious. You saw magic in things other people overlooked. Don't let him take that from you. Don't let him make you afraid of your own wilderness." Other letters were more practical, a posthumous guidebook to self-sufficiency. He explained the delicate art of splitting firewood, the best places to forage for mushrooms, the way to read the weather in the clouds. It was as if he was sitting there with me, teaching me all the things he never got the chance to. I was learning how to survive, but I was also getting to know my father again. Not the distant, sad man from my recent memory, but the capable, thoughtful, loving man from my childhood. The man who saw the world not as something to be conquered or consumed, but as something to be understood and respected. It was a painful, beautiful conversation across time. I've been sharing this journey, and the response has been overwhelming. So many of you have reached out with your own stories of starting over, of finding strength in the ruins of a past life. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had to dig deep and find a part of yourself you thought was gone, let me know in the comments. Your stories matter. They create a community here, a place where we can all remember we're not alone in the fight. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. We're all in this together. One evening, after a long day of sanding and prepping the old floorboards for refinishing, I picked up the next letter in the stack. This one felt different. The envelope was thicker, heavier. The date on it was from just a few months before he died. His handwriting was less steady, more urgent. "Alara," it began with no preamble. "There is something else you need to know about this place. Something I should have told you long ago. The cabin is your safe harbor, but the land is your sword." My stomach tightened. The reason I bought this plot of land wasn't just because it was remote and cheap. It's because of what's under it. This ridge sits on top of the Blackwood Aquifer, one of the purest and most significant underground water sources in the state, and this specific plot, Lot 42, contains the primary springhead that feeds the entire system. The water rights attached to this deed are older than the state itself. They are ironclad. For years, a company called Northridge Development has been trying to buy up all the land around here. They want to build a luxury resort, a golf course, a bottled water plant. They see this valley as a commodity. They've bullied, threatened, and lowballed every landowner into selling. I was the last holdout, Northridge Development. The name sent a jolt through me. It was the company Mark's father was a senior partner at. The company Mark had often bragged about, their aggressive tactics, their relentless pursuit of profit. It had all just been background noise to me then, the dull talk of men in suits. Now it was a threat. "They tried to take the land from me through legal means," the letter went on. "They claimed eminent domain. They challenged the deed's authenticity. They buried me in paperwork and legal fees. I fought them quietly for almost 10 years. It's where most of my money went, not to travel, but to lawyers. They don't know the property is in your name now. When I died, the case went dormant. They probably think they've won, that the land will eventually go to the state for back taxes, and they can snap it up for pennies on the dollar. But the annuity is still paying the taxes. The land is still yours. They will come for it, Alara. When they find out you're here, they will come for you. They will offer you money, a life-changing amount. Enough to make you forget this little cabin and all the trouble that comes with it." He had included another, smaller envelope inside the first. It was full of documents, copies of his legal correspondence with Northridge, geological surveys of the aquifer, and expert testimonies on the environmental impact of their proposed development. It was a complete war chest, a decade of his secret fight, all laid out for me. "This is your choice," the letter concluded. "You can take their money. I would not blame you if you did. You deserve an easy life after everything you've been through. Sell it, walk away, and never look back. Build a new life for yourself, a safe one. Or you can fight. You can finish what I started. You can protect this place. It's a harder path. They will play dirty. They will try to crush you, just as they tried to crush me. But you are not me. You are stronger than I ever was. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you. I sat there in the quiet cabin, the letter trembling in my hand, the weight of his words settling over me. The silence of the forest outside no longer felt peaceful. It felt precarious. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of land. It was a battlefield. My father hadn't just left me a home. He'd left me a legacy of resistance. And a choice, sell or the easy wrong or the harder right. Mark's face swam in my mind, his smug satisfaction in the lawyer's office. His father, a man I'd only met a handful of times with cold, calculating eyes. They were part of this. They had taken my home, my past, my sense of self. And now, they wanted to take this too. They wanted to take my father's last stand, pave it over, and sell it in plastic bottles. A cold, clear anger, purer than any I had ever felt, rose up in me. It burned away the last vestiges of fear and self-doubt. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated my father. They thought we were just collateral damage in their pursuit of profit. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The choice was never a choice at all. I was not going to run. I was going to fight. The next morning, I drove back to Pine Ridge, but this time my destination wasn't the hardware store. It was a small, dusty office with a shingle that read Davies & Son Legal Services. A much older, much more tired-looking version of the man who had handled my divorce sat behind a large oak desk. This was his father, the original Mr. Davies. I introduced myself and laid my father's letter and the file of documents on his desk. I told him everything. He listened patiently, his face impassive, reading through the documents as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, looking from the papers to me and back again. "I remember your father," he said finally, his voice raspy. "Stubborn man, smart. He came to me when this all started. I told him he was picking a fight with a giant. He told me some giants need to be fought." He tapped a finger on the Northridge letterhead. "This is a different league, Ms. Vance. Their legal team is an army. It bankrupted your father. It could do the same to you, cash box or no." "I know," I said, my voice steady, "but he left me the ammunition. He did all the groundwork. He just ran out of time." Mr. Davies looked at me, his eyes sharp and assessing the same way my father used to. He was weighing my resolve. "This won't be a clean fight," he warned. "They'll dig into your life, the divorce, your personal history. They'll use it to paint you as unstable, unreliable." "Let them," I said, the anger flaring in me again. "Mark already did that. I've heard it all before. This time, I'm ready for it. This time, I'm fighting for something more than a couch and a joint bank account." He stared at me for another moment, and then a slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile. "Your father was right," he said. "You've got strong bones." He picked up the phone. "Let's get to work." The first letter from Northridge Development arrived a week later. It was delivered by a courier in a sleek black car that looked alien and predatory against the rustic landscape. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly chilling. It acknowledged my inheritance of the property and made a generous offer. It was, as my father had predicted, a life-changing amount of money, enough to buy a new house, a new car, to live comfortably for years without working. It was the easy way out, printed on expensive letterhead. Tucked inside was a note on a different letterhead, from the personal law firm of Mark's father. It was less professional. It spoke of my recent emotional difficulties and suggested that taking the offer would be the wisest and most stable path forward for someone in my delicate condition. It was a threat wrapped in a backhanded compliment. They were already using my past against me. Old Alara would have crumpled. She would have seen the wisdom in their threat, the seductive logic of giving up. But I wasn't her anymore. I was a woman who knew how to patch a roof in a coming storm. I wrote a single sentence on the back of their offer and sent it back with the courier. Not for sale, the war had begun. Life settled into a new rhythm. Days were for the cabin. I worked from sunrise to sunset. I tore out the rotten floorboards and replaced them, learning how to measure twice and cut once, the scent of fresh sawdust filling the air. I reglazed the windows, painstakingly replacing each broken pane. I bought a book on masonry and taught myself how to re-chink the log walls, mixing the mortar and pressing it into the gaps, sealing my home against the coming winter. The physical work was healing. With every nail I hammered, every board I sawed, I was rebuilding not just a structure, but myself. My body grew stronger, my hands calloused and capable. I felt a sense of deep, abiding satisfaction that I had never found in my previous life. I was creating something real and lasting. Evenings were for the fight. I spent hours on the phone with Mr. Davies, going over strategy. I read and reread my father's research, memorizing geological data and legal precedents. We filed a preemptive injunction to block any exploratory drilling by North Ridge, citing the fragile ecosystem of the aquifer. Their army of lawyers responded with a flood of motions, trying to drown us in paperwork, just as they had with my father. But this time, they weren't dealing with one tired man. They were dealing with him, his daughter, and his legacy of research. I started a small local campaign. I went to the Pine Ridge Town Hall meetings. I spoke to my neighbors, the few other families who lived scattered along the ridge. I showed them my father's research, explained what North Ridge's development would do to the water table, to the wells they all relied on. At first, they were skeptical. They were people who kept to themselves. But they remembered my father, and they trusted the land more than they trusted a corporation from the city. Gus from the hardware store was the first to openly support me. He put up a sign in his window, "Save Blackwood Creek soon." Other signs began to appear. We were no longer just one woman in a cabin. We were a community. The fight was far from over. North Ridge was a wounded giant, and now it was angry. They started playing dirtier. Surveyors would show up at the edge of my property, planting stakes just over the line. Trucks would drive down my road late at night, their headlights sweeping across the cabin, a silent intimidation. They filed a frivolous lawsuit against me, a personal character attack disguised as a legal claim, using information that could only have come from Mark. It hurt. It was designed to hurt, to make me feel small and exposed. There were nights I'd lie awake, the weight of it all pressing down on me, the fear creeping back in. On those nights, I would take out my father's letters and read them again. Don't let them make you afraid of your own wilderness. And I would look around at the warm, solid walls of the cabin I was rebuilding, and I would find my strength again. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves of the trees were turning to fire, I was on the porch, sanding a new railing I had built. A dusty pickup truck I didn't recognize rumbled up the drive. An older woman with a kind, weathered face and a long gray braid got out. She introduced herself as Sarah, my nearest neighbor from 2 miles down the ridge. I had seen her at the town meetings, a quiet presence in the back. She was holding a warm, cloth-covered basket. "Thought you might like some fresh bread," she said, her voice soft. "And my husband said to tell you he has a cord of seasoned oak you can have for the winter if you need it." I was so touched I didn't know what to say. "Thank you," I managed. She nodded, looking at the cabin. "You've done good work here," she said. "This place hasn't looked this loved since Tom was alive." She called him Tom. The familiar name created a pang in my chest. "You knew my father?" "Oh, sure," she smiled. "He was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself mostly. But he loved this land. He used to say it had a soul. He'd be real proud of you, you know, for staying, for fighting." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the valley, a tapestry of red and gold. The air was clean and cold, promising snow. The lawsuit was still looming. The threat from North Ridge was still very real, and my future was uncertain. I had a long, hard winter ahead of me. But for the first time since I'd left that beige lawyer's office, I felt like I was home. This cabin, this land, this fight, it was my inheritance. Not just the physical place, but the purpose that came with it. My father had given me more than a key to a house. He had given me a key to myself. He had shown me that value wasn't about money or possessions. It was about connection to the past, to the land, and to the people who were willing to stand with you. It was about having the courage to protect the things that can't be bought or sold. The story isn't over. The legal battles will continue, and I know there are harder days to come. But something fundamental has shifted inside me. I am no longer a victim of my circumstances. I am the caretaker of my father's legacy. I am a resident of Blackwood Creek. I am a woman with strong bones standing my ground, and as I look out at the wilderness that I now call home, I am not afraid. I am ready. This journey taught me that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what truly matters. It taught me that the deepest love is sometimes the quietest, and that the most valuable inheritances aren't written in a will, but in the choices we make and the fights we are willing to take on. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This has been more than just telling a story. It's been about sharing a piece of my healing. And I truly believe that sharing our stories is how we heal together. So I want to ask you, what's the most valuable thing you've ever inherited that had nothing to do with money? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I can't tell you how much strength I draw from this community. Please subscribe and stick around. There's more work.
Good to see you. Also, thanks for the follow, Seamus. Appreciate it. Oh my god, thanks for the follow, Kimchi5617. That's the biggest mug I've ever seen again. How many areas are there in total? I was convinced there was only 4. So Robin, there are 5. So these are like the first 4 are like the main like story islands, and the 5th one is kind of like an open world kind of thing, right? Where there's not really like a big quest line going on here, but this is where you meet Evie. I did get to Pallet Town, Mia, finally. You're welcome. You seem chill. Oh, thanks, Seamus. Appreciate it. Also, thanks for the follow too, Alzers. I also renamed Pallet Town to be spelled like the OG, because that was kind of bothering me. I'm not gonna lie. I've only just started trying to deal with Rocky Ridges. The ash is stressing me out. The ash, I understand that. It is kind of stressful when you see it. I'm buying the Switch 2 just for this game next week. My wife's been begging me to. Do you plan on playing it, Seamus? Because your wife may not put it down. This voice is giving me ASMR. Thanks, Kimchi. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll put this desk here for now. Yeah, and some other titles I want to play. Nice. Which ones are you planning on playing? Okay, our house is ready. You two, where are you? Oh, you guys just like came into my house like that. Cool. I might have to buy her one for herself and get me one for my own use. Honestly, yeah, you might have to. Have y'all heard of Creature Kitchen? No. Yeah, me neither, Ellie. What is that? I really want to play Pokemon Red on there and a lot of the old games you can get with the subs, like Zelda and stuff. Ooh, that's fantastic. Great choice.